morning ahead. As the sun's feeble light barely penetrated the cold, dim room, Filkia Gaia was roused from her slumber by her lady-in-waiting, Severina. The woman crept in to open the thick curtains, letting in a sliver of light that illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. "Close it back and light a candle," Gaia ordered, her voice laced with irritation. "I'm certain to catch an arrow. This is the only place I feel safe." Severina raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Why would that be, my lady?" Gaia sighed deeply, her weariness evident. "There are more killers in this family than in my county. What do I have to worry about today? The royal court has gathered. They await you, my lady," Severina replied, concern flickering across her face as they left the sleeping quarters, the heavy door creaking as it swung shut behind them. As they stepped into the hall, they encountered Combs Carus of Somerset, Gaia's marshal. He greeted her with a slight bow, but his demeanor hinted at troubling news. She raised an eyebrow, sensing something amiss. "You're back early. I don't see the fat drunk with you. Where is he?" Carus's expression turned grave. "My lady, we didn't see the Asterlianese coming. I believe they are allied with Navra." Gaia's gaze turned steely, her resolve hardening. "Nilos will take care of them. Organize and ready 10,000 men for him. After that, meet me in the council." He bowed, a look of determination crossing his face as he walked away. Gaia entered the royal court, the grand chamber alive with the hum of voices and the rustle of fine garments. Long wooden tables stretched across the floor, adorned with rich tapestries depicting the empire's victories. Flickering torches cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, illuminating the faces of the gathered nobles, their expressions a mix of reverence and expectation. The royal court. As she scanned the court, Gaia spotted both Shakim and Nilos standing near the throne. Approaching them, she felt a rush of warmth as her son, Caesar Shakim of the Houghton house, leaned down to plant a kiss on her cheek. It was a shock to see him travel such a distance to reach her court, and a smile broke across her face. He hadn't forgotten her. "Let this begin," Gaia declared, settling into her throne with authority. She gestured for her guards to open the hall doors, allowing a stream of people to file in. Some lined up in front of her throne, their faces a mix of hope and trepidation, while others moved aside to observe the proceedings with bated breath. After a moment, silence fell upon the chamber. All faces turned toward hers expectantly. 3 petitioners stood in an orderly row, waiting for her call, their fates resting in her hands. The atmosphere in the royal court grew tense as Dux Callistus of House Thomas stepped forward. His face, weathered by years of service, carried the deep-set worry of a man who had seen the rumblings of war before. He bowed before Filkia Gaia, the flickering torchlight casting shadows across his solemn expression. "My lady," he began, voice strained with urgency. "The threat from King Milan of Lothari grows ever closer to our borders. The Bel's defenses are weak, and if he presses his claim further, we will not withstand a siege." The gathered nobles leaned in, listening intently, the tension in the chamber palpable. Gaia's eyes narrowed as she studied him, her fingers tapping slowly on the arm of her throne. She knew Callistus's words carried weight, but she would not be hurried into panic. "The Bel's defenses do need strengthening," she acknowledged, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We shall bolster the walls. increase our patrols and ensure every gate is manned. But remember this, Callistus, she added, leaning forward, her tone taking on a cold edge. If King Milan becomes more than just a threat on our borders, if he dares to overstep, then the crown itself will deal with him. Her words hung in the air, their meaning clear. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Callistus bowed again, gratitude mingling with the weight of his responsibility. Thank you, my lady. Your wisdom will safeguard our lands. As he stepped back, the court remained silent, each noble lost in their thoughts of impending conflict. Gaia, feeling the weight of leadership press upon her shoulders, took a deep breath. The path ahead would require more than just fortifications. It would demand unity and resolve. Next, Ducissa Paulina of Holstein stepped forward, her voice smooth yet insidious as she hinted at her influence over certain factions within the realm. My lady, it would be wise to consider the delicate balance of power. Those who cross me might find themselves in a precarious position. Gaia regarded Paulina with a steely gaze, her expression unyielding. Be careful with your words, Ducissa. Treachery does not go unnoticed in this court, and those who play with fire often find themselves burned. The tension in the chamber thickened, the other nobles shifting uneasily at the threat in Gaia's voice. You may think you wield power, but know this. I could have your head for such insolence. I'm allowing you to walk out today, but think carefully about your foolish decisions. Paulina's face flushed with anger, and she huffed, storming out of the court. Her pride wounded. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. Moments later, Shakim approached his mother, concern etched on his face. Mother, I overheard Ducissa Paulina speaking with the court physician. There's something suspicious in her words. Without hesitation, Gaia's expression hardened. Get him out of my court when this is over. I will not tolerate such games. Her voice echoed with authority, leaving no room for dissent. The last petitioner, a representative from the religious community of St. Paulix, stepped forward, a humble demeanor masking the significance of his offering. My Lady Filkia, I bring an anthology of our most cherished Cindercrest texts. They embody the spirit of our faith and the rich culture of our people. Gaia leaned forward in her throne, her interest piqued. An anthology? You honor me with this gift. It is vital to embrace the diverse tapestry of our realm. As the representative presented the carefully bound texts, she accepted them with a nod of gratitude. This will serve as a bridge between our communities, fostering understanding and unity. Thank you for your dedication to our shared future. The air in the chamber shifted, a sense of reverence washing over the gathered nobles. It was a reminder that, despite the tensions and threats that loomed, there remained a foundation of culture and faith to bind them together. As the representative stepped back, a sense of hope flickered in the air, contrasting sharply with the earlier discord. The court was reminded that alliances could be strengthened through cultural exchange, even amidst political strife. With the court session concluded, Gaia rose from her throne, her mind swirling with the weight of the decisions ahead. As she walked alongside her sons, Caesar, Shakim, and Nilos, the atmosphere was thick with tension, especially after the clash with Ducissa Paulina. Shakim, his brow furrowed with concern, finally broke the silence. Mother, we cannot let Paulina's threats go unanswered. She's a snake, and it's only a matter of time before she strikes. Gaia paused, casting a piercing glance at her son. Patience, Shakim. We must not reveal our hand too soon. If her supporters dare to openly rebel, then we will act. Until then, we play the game as we must. Nilos nodded, his tone steady. But we can't afford to be complacent. The longer we wait, the stronger she becomes. True, Gaia acknowledged, her voice firm yet contemplative. That's why I'm assigning you both a mission. You will lead an elite strike to claim Pravia and Oviedo. The Order of Cindercrest will accompany you. They are fierce warriors devoted to my cause and will ensure our strength is felt. Shakim's eyes lit with determination. We won't fail you, Mother. The cities will be ours. See that they are, Gaia replied, her expression hardening. And return swiftly. I need you both at my side as we navigate these treacherous waters. Shadows at dusk, the sun hung low over the horizon, casting a soft golden hue over the landscape. Victoria, Houghton, Ness, and Sabina had made their way from the capital to this quiet, secluded village, hoping for some respite from their duties. Their journey had been long, and the peaceful village seemed like a perfect place to unwind. As they entered, the village's charm greeted them. Cobblestone paths, smoke curling up from chimneys, and the smell of fresh-baked bread wafting in the air. It felt like a world apart from the bustling streets of Porlix. The people here were warm, if not a little distant, but it was the sort of quiet that invited relaxation. I needed this, Sabina said, her voice light and carefree. She picked a flower from a nearby bush and tucked it behind her ear. No politics, no scheming, just us. Victoria smiled, but her eyes were always moving, scanning their surroundings. It was something she couldn't turn off. Even in the most peaceful of settings, they wandered through the village, stopping by a small square where villagers gathered around a bonfire. Children played, and an old man strummed a lute, filling the air with soft melodic tunes. The villagers welcomed them, offering fruits and herbs, and they spent hours talking and laughing with the locals. As the sky darkened, the mood shifted subtly. The sounds of the village began to fade, and a heavier silence descended upon the square. Victoria glanced at the setting sun, noting the growing shadows. That's when she first noticed him. A figure in the distance, cloaked in a dark robe, stood near the edge of the village. His face was obscured by the hood, but his stance was rigid, like a sentinel watching over them. Sabina, feeling the change in the air, nudged Victoria. "Who's that?" she whispered, though the hooded man hadn't made a move. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I don't know, but he doesn't look like he belongs here." The man's gaze suddenly turned to them, his dark eyes piercing through the dimming light. Without a word, he started toward them, his long strides quick and deliberate. When he reached them, he paused, his gaze flicking between the two women. His voice was low, rough, with an urgency that chilled Victoria's spine. "You should leave," he said, his eyes darting around nervously. "Do not stay past nightfall. It's not safe." Sabina laughed nervously, but Victoria felt her heart tighten in her chest. "What do you mean?" Victoria asked, her tone more serious now. The man glanced over his shoulder, his expression darkening. "This village, it's not what it seems. Come morning, you won't be able to leave. Leave now, or you'll regret it." Sabina took a step back, a mix of confusion and amusement on her face. "Is this some sort of superstition? We've been here all day and everything's fine." The man's lips twitched into something between a warning and a grimace. "It won't be fine. Once the sun sets. Trust me." Before they could ask more, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as he had arrived. Victoria and Sabina exchanged uneasy glances. The air had changed, and the warmth of the village seemed distant now, replaced with a sense of unease. "I don't like this," Victoria murmured, her instincts on high alert. "I think we should leave." Sabina shook her head, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Maybe, but the village looks harmless. Perhaps we're overthinking it." But Victoria's mind was already made up. "No, I've got a bad feeling about this. We can't ignore it." As the last light of day faded, the village seemed to shift, its peaceful veneer cracking as something darker waited just beyond the horizon. Our friend or foe? Severina stormed through the echoing halls, her heart racing as she juggled some of the Filkir's pressing affairs. The air was thick with tension, the echoes of distant voices weaving through the stone corridors. Just as she turned a corner, she was intercepted by Duchessa Honora, a sharp-eyed woman known for her cunning and rivalry with Gaia. "Severina, how lovely to see you," Honora purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She leaned casually against a stone pillar, a sly smile playing on her lips as she studied Severina. "I wanted to extend an invitation. Holstein can be a refuge, a safe haven for you amidst all this chaos." Severina stiffened, the weight of loyalty pressing heavily on her. She felt the warmth of the sun filtering through the stained glass windows, but Honora's shadow loomed ominously. "Thank you, Duchessa, but I must decline. My place is with Gaia, and I have concerns about the recent threats we face." Her voice was steady, but inside, doubt began to gnaw at her. Honora's smile widened, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Ah, loyalty. Such a noble sentiment. But remember, trust can be a dangerous thing, especially in these turbulent times. You might find yourself trapped in webs you never intended to weave." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not everyone who smiles is your ally, my dear." Severina narrowed her eyes, sensing the veiled warning beneath the Ducissa's honeyed words. "I appreciate your concern, Honora, but I'm not swayed by shadows. I stand with my Filkir." With that, she brushed past the Ducissa, her resolve firm, even as the words hung in the air, heavy with implication. As Severina walked away, she could feel Honora's gaze piercing her back. The uncertainty lingered in the corridor, the threat of betrayal echoing in her mind. Would her loyalty be enough to protect her when the storm finally broke? As Severina moved deeper into the castle, the daylight streaming through the high, narrow windows painted patches of warm light on the stone floor. Dust particles danced in the sunbeams, creating a contrast with the dim shadows that clung to the corners of the corridor. Despite the brightness outside, the tension in the air was thick and heavy, pressing in on her as she made her way through the familiar passages. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Honora's words, each one a reminder of the precarious path she now walked. Even in the light of day, the castle's corridors felt like a labyrinth, full of secrets hiding just beyond reach. She tried to steady her breathing, but every step seemed to echo louder, a reminder that in this place, even the walls had ears. As she neared the lower quarters of the castle, where the air grew cooler and the hustle of daily life faded into the distance, she caught sight of a figure waiting in the shade of an arched doorway. His face was obscured by the hood of his cloak, but she knew who it was before he even spoke. "Severina," the man called out softly, the midday sun casting a sharp line across his face as he pulled back his hood. Publius's expression was unreadable, his eyes as sharp as ever, observing her with a quiet intensity. She hesitated, her hand instinctively brushing the dagger at her side, more out of habit than fear. "What brings you here, Publius?" she asked, forcing a note of calm into her voice. "Surely you have better things to do than linger in shadowed hallways." Publius stepped forward, his boots scuffing against the stone floor as he moved closer. "Do you really believe shadows only come out at night? Secrets have a way of finding their way into the light, Severina. And lately, there's been no shortage of them." Severina narrowed her eyes, keeping her posture rigid. "What secrets then? Are you here to share some wisdom, or merely to remind me of the obvious?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of Publius's mouth. "Perhaps a bit of both. You've been seen with Honora, where your true loyalties lie. In times like these, even the daylight can't wash away the doubt." Her jaw tightened, but she refused to let her unease show. "I am loyal to the crown, Publius. You know that." "Do I?" he replied, his tone turning cool. He glanced towards the window, where sunlight streamed in, casting a pool of golden light onto the stone floor between them. "Loyalty is a fine thing, but it can be a dangerous burden when the tide shifts. Remember, Severina, storms don't wait for nightfall." With that, he gave her one last searching look, then turned and disappeared down the corridor. Severina watched him go, her mind racing with his words. Even in the light of day, it seemed, the shadows lingered close. "Ready them." Juliana of Poitiers, her light brown hair catching the morning sun, watched as her sons Marli and Paulix sparred in the courtyard. Each swing of their wooden practice swords echoed through the space, and Juliana called out pointers. "Marli, keep your stance wider. Paulix, don't forget your footwork." Shoma approached from the shadow of the castle, a stern look on his face. "You're pushing them hard," he said with a half smile. But Juliana didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the boys, her voice steady. "They'll need it, Shoma. These aren't peaceful times." He nodded. Then his tone shifted. "I'll be leaving soon. I've decided to join my father against King Ramon, the foolish fat drunk." Juliana finally turned to face him, her expression sharp. "And you think leaving us here is the best way to unify the Aphrodian region?" she asked, a touch of sarcasm in her voice. "It's always the grand schemes. But who actually benefits in the end?" Shoma's jaw tightened. "You think I'd let my uncle claim the spoils? He's a latecomer in the family, trying to grasp at what he hasn't earned." Juliana crossed her arms, glancing back at her sons. "Just make sure you don't end up doing the dirty work while she sits back and takes the credit. Our boys deserve more than that." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not going for him, Juliana. I'm going for us, to secure a future where our sons don't have to fight the same battles." She looked at him, searching his eyes for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "Then fight well, Shoma. Don't let your grandmother drag you into her schemes without a plan of your own." Shoma's expression darkened at the mention of Gaia. He glanced toward the training yard where his sons sparred, their faces set with fierce determination. "You think I don't see it, Juliana? She's always pushing, always plotting. My father might be the one sending us to war, but it's her hands guiding the pieces on the board. Juliana stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. I know you see it, Shoma, but knowing and acting aren't the same. Gaia has a way of twisting things, making you believe the fight is yours when all the while it's hers. Don't let her make you a pawn in this. Shoma let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. A pawn, Juliana? I've been one since the day I could lift a sword. But I won't let her control my sons too. They deserve better than to fight in battles they don't understand. Juliana's gaze softened, glancing back at the boys. Then make sure they know what they're fighting for, Shoma. Don't let her stories of glory blind them to the blood it'll cost. He turned back toward the yard, watching his sons' wooden swords clash with a dull rhythm. Keep them ready, Juliana. They may need to defend this place sooner than you think. Juliana nodded, her eyes lingering on his profile. They'll be ready, but promise me, if it comes down to it, you'll stand against her. You'll put them before whatever dreams she's spun for this family. Shoma looked at her, his jaw tightening. I'll do what I must, but you know as well as I do, defying Gaia comes at a price. She held his gaze for a moment longer, the weight of the unspoken truth settling between them. Just make sure that price isn't their future, Shoma. He offered a small, grim smile before turning to leave, his footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. Watching him go, her thoughts clouded with the weight of the future and the uncertain paths ahead. She couldn't shake the feeling that Gaia's ambitions cast a longer shadow than any of them realized. The clash of swords in the training yard rang in her ears, a reminder that the battles they fought in the open were only half the war. Juliana watched the boys spar when she heard the familiar voice of Cecilia behind her. This is a great view of two Houghton warriors clashing, my lady. I pray to the Father they only meet on the fields, watching over one another, rather than in conflict. Juliana's eyes remained fixed on her sons, but a wry smile tugged at her lips. And not over horse and gold, she replied dryly. Turning to face Cecilia, she raised an eyebrow, curious. What brings you away from Upper Bono, Cecilia? It must be more than just pleasantries. Cecilia adjusted her cloak against the cool breeze, glancing toward the sparring ground. I had to come see you before you returned to Houghton House. It's been far too long, Juliana. Juliana tilted her head, considering her friend's words. Ah, so I'll have some company for a while then? She turned her gaze back to the training grounds, watching the sharp movements of Mali and Pollock. Her tone grew more serious. I'm not leaving, Cecilia. Shoma is the one going to Leon. I need to stay here, where I can keep an eye on things. Cecilia studied Juliana's expression, noticing the resolve in her friend's eyes. That sounds like you, always with a plan, she remarked, her voice light but laced with understanding. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself, Juliana. The winds of change are blowing through these lands, and I fear what they might bring. Juliana's smile faded as she met Cecilia's gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the truth behind her words. The air between them seemed to thicken with the weight of the unspoken, the knowledge that war would bring challenges neither could predict. I promise, Cecilia. But remember, it's not just me who needs to be careful. These winds touch us all. They stood side by side, watching the young warriors spar, each lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. Training yard. Shoma pushed open the heavy wooden door to his father's study. the scent of aged parchment and polished wood filling the air. Lord Shakim, known to many as Caesar Shakim, sat behind a grand desk cluttered with maps and scrolls, his expression focused as he traced the lines of a territory with his finger. "Father," Shoma began, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "When do we leave for war?" Shakim looked up, his brow furrowed in thought. "In a fortnight," he replied, his voice steady. "We'll gather our forces and set out." Shoma shifted his weight, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "How long will this take?" 10,000 men will be sufficient for a siege that lasts 12 months, Shakim said, his tone matter of fact. "If the Filkir gives us more onagers, we could reduce that to 8 months. But we need the siege engines to make a real impact." Shoma nodded, considering the implications of that timeline. "I understand, but I need to handle some matters before then." Shakim raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What matters?" "Just some preparations," Shoma replied vaguely, unwilling to share too much. He knew his father would want to know every detail, and he wasn't ready to explain yet. "Speaking of preparations," Shakim said suddenly, changing the subject. "Did you know the Houghtons claim to have 23 houses and almost 900 members that we know about?" Shoma frowned, his mind racing at the implications. "That's a considerable number. If they can unite, they'll be a force to reckon with." "Yes, and if we're to expand our influence, we need to consider how we approach them," Shakim said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not underestimating their potential, and neither should you." "Agreed, father." "We should be cautious," Shoma replied, feeling the weight of their responsibilities pressing down on him. "But we must also be ready to act swiftly if needed. The last thing we want is to be caught off guard." Shakim nodded, his eyes sharp. "Remember, Shoma, this is not just about winning battles. It's about securing alliances and building a legacy. Be strategic in your actions, and don't let emotions cloud your judgment." Shoma met his father's gaze, determination rising within him. "I won't forget, father. I'll ensure that our plans are solid and our path forward is clear." With a slight nod of approval, Shakim returned to his maps. "Good. Now go. There's much to be done before the sun sets, and time waits for no one." As Shoma left the study, he felt a sense of urgency wash over him. The looming conflict weighed heavily on his mind, but he was resolute. He would do whatever it took to prepare for the battles ahead, both on the battlefield and within the treacherous world of alliances and power. He walked briskly through the castle halls, the stone walls cool against his skin. Sunlight streamed through the narrow windows. The distant sounds of clashing swords and shouted commands echoed from the training yard, growing louder with each step he took. Shoma's heart quickened at the thought of the soldiers honing their skills, each one a vital piece in the game that was about to unfold. As he approached the large wooden doors leading to the yard, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He could almost feel the tension in the air, thick and electric, a reminder of the impending war. With determination, he pushed open the doors and stepped into the vibrant chaos outside, ready to face whatever challenges awaited him. Shoma scanned the training yard, where soldiers moved with purpose, their swords clashing in a rhythmic dance. The sight filled him with both pride and anxiety. He knew that each man was counting on him to lead them through the storm ahead. The sight of the soldiers honing their skills brought him a moment of clarity. They were ready, focused and eager for the challenge ahead. Shoma approached a group of men engaged in sparring, watching as they exchanged blows with precision and speed. Their determination ignited a fire within him. He had to ensure they were prepared not just for combat, but for the shifting tides of loyalty and betrayal that awaited them. "Keep your guard up," he called out to one soldier who had momentarily dropped his defenses. The man quickly straightened, nodding in acknowledgement. "Lord Shoma," a familiar voice called from behind him. It was Nilos, his uncle, striding over with an easy confidence. "You seem deep in thought. Is it about the war?" Shoma turned, a grin breaking through his earlier tension. "You know me too well. I'm just trying to wrap my head around everything. Father has high expectations." Nilos chuckled lightly. "He always does. But you'll rise to the occasion, as you always have. You're a Houghtoness after all." "Maybe, but the stakes are higher this time. We're not just fighting for land. We're fighting for our future," Shoma replied, his tone serious. "I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched, that there are those who would like to see us fail." "Then let them watch," Nilos said confidently, clapping Shoma on the shoulder. "We're stronger than they know. We've been preparing for this, and I trust our men." Shoma appreciated his uncle's optimism, but he couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at him. "I hope you're right, but we must be strategic. I want you to rally the men and ensure they're ready for whatever lies ahead. We can't afford to underestimate anyone." Nilos nodded, his expression turning serious. "Understood. I'll make sure they're sharp and prepared. And what about the prisoners? Any word on their fate?" "Not yet," Shoma replied, his jaw tightening. "But I've heard rumors that Gaia is growing impatient. We need to hope she doesn't decide to execute them. Their fate could spark unrest." Nilos frowned. "Then we should keep a close eye on her. If she feels threatened, who knows what she might do? We can't let her act without considering the consequences." "Exactly. It's a delicate balance we have to maintain," Shoma said, determination hardening his resolve. "We need to secure our position while navigating the treachery that lies within our own ranks." As they discussed strategies, the sounds of the training yard faded into the background. For Shoma, this was just the beginning of a long and arduous journey. The war would test their strength, but the true challenge would be in safeguarding their legacy against the shadows that lurk just out of sight. "What prisoners?" Good people. Victoria and Sabina were still basking in the lively atmosphere of the village, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the celebration. Laughter echoed through the air as the villagers offered them food and drink. The wine they sipped from wooden cups was smooth, sweet, and seemed to ease the tension Victoria had been carrying for weeks. The music played with a light-hearted rhythm. Children ran about, and the smell of roasting meats filled the air. The sense of freedom here, away from the castle and the watchful eyes of her mother, made Victoria feel alive. Sabina, ever the social one, was laughing and chatting with the villagers, pulling Victoria into the heart of the festivities. Yet Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The village felt different, though she couldn't pinpoint why. A slight unease prickled the back of her neck. The faces around her were friendly enough, but there was something in their eyes that hinted at hidden depths. As they moved through the square, Victoria's attention was drawn to a man in the crowd. A stranger, dark-skinned and lean, with a quiet confidence that made him stand out among the villagers. He seemed to be observing everything carefully, his movements deliberate. Their eyes met briefly, and Victoria felt her unease deepen. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, but something in his demeanor set her on edge. He disappeared into the crowd before she could take a closer look, leaving her with a lingering sense of suspicion. Sabina caught the direction of Victoria's gaze and leaned closer. "He's from the south," Sabina said casually, nodding toward where the man had been. "I've never seen anyone like him here before." Before Victoria could respond, a voice interrupted their conversation. A woman, her weathered face lined with years of life, approached them. She seemed to be watching everything with a sharp, observant eye. She didn't join in the revelry, but stood at the edge of it, quietly taking in the scene. "It's not usually like this," the woman said, her tone light, but with a subtle undercurrent of caution. "A lot of strange faces tonight, a lot of food, a lot of men I've never seen before. It's never this way." Victoria, still unsure what to make of the woman's tone, asked, "So it's not always like this?" The woman gave a slow, knowing nod. "No, not tonight. Not this much," she said, glancing around at the crowd. "Things are different. And when the sun starts to dip low, people act different." Curious, Victoria pressed. "What do you mean by that?" The woman smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "What brings you to Wookiee?" she asked, the question turning the conversation back onto Victoria. Victoria hesitated, her thoughts turning inward. She looked around the village, the warm sunlight stretching across the faces of the people. "I just wanted to get away for a while," she admitted, her voice carrying an edge of frustration. "To be free, even if just for a moment. I don't want to be locked up in my mother's castle all the time." The woman's expression softened, but there was still a hard edge to her voice. "You might think this is freedom, but you don't know what it means to be free. To be truly free, you have to understand the risks. Look around." She motioned to the open village square, where the people were mingling in the sunlight. "There are no walls here. Nothing protecting us. You want to be free? You should also be ready to face the dangers that come with it." Victoria frowned, her unease growing. "But isn't it safer here than in the castle?" she asked, the words escaping before she could stop herself. The woman's gaze hardened. "Safe, maybe. But safety is an illusion. I walk over 200 steps into darkness just to get home. And when I'm there, there's no light, no one watching over me. It's just me. And still, I don't feel safe." She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. "You should keep an eye on her." Victoria stood silently for a moment, her thoughts swirling with the woman's cryptic warnings. As the conversation ended, the woman turned and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Victoria with an unsettling feeling that lingered in the air long after she was gone. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the village, Victoria couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. The laughter and music around her felt too loud, too carefree. The people seemed almost too eager to welcome them, and the strange man from the south lingered in her thoughts. She looked at Sabina, who was still chatting animatedly with a group of villagers, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Sabina!" Victoria called, her voice cutting through the din of the festival. "We need to leave. Now!" Sabina barely turned her head, too caught up in the moment to notice the urgency in Victoria's voice. "Leave! We just got here. Come on, relax. It's not every day we get to enjoy something like this." Victoria's eyes flicked nervously to the entrance of the village. The roads were growing darker, and there was a strange chill in the air. The woman's words echoed in her mind. Not everything is what it seems. It's too risky, Victoria said, her voice a little sharper now. We're already past the time we should have left. I don't like it here, Sabina. I don't feel... Sabina turned to her then, a flash of frustration crossing her face. You're always worrying about things, Vic. Just for once, can't we enjoy a little freedom? This place isn't that bad. And anyway, she added with a teasing grin, I haven't had a chance to really relax since... well, you know, everything. Victoria felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to spoil Sabina's fun, but something in her gut told her staying was a mistake. Please, Sabina, we have to go before... A loud shout from across the square interrupted her, and Sabina turned toward it with an eager expression. A group of young men were challenging each other to a drinking contest, laughing and shouting. The atmosphere was infectious, and Sabina's face softened, her earlier tension melting away. See? They're just having fun, and it's not like anything bad's going to happen. Victoria shook her head, anxiety crawling up her spine. She grabbed Sabina's arm, pulling her back slightly. Sabina, I'm serious. We need to go. Now. Sabina's smile faltered, and she met Victoria's eyes, her expression softening. You're always so worried. You think something's going to happen? Her voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it, an impatience that she usually reserved for moments when she felt cornered. Victoria hesitated. She didn't want to voice the fear gnawing at her, didn't want to sound paranoid. I don't like how things feel. This place, the people, it's all too much. We shouldn't be here. Sabina sighed, her brow furrowing. You're overthinking it, Victoria. I'll stay here for a bit longer. I'm not ready to leave yet. Not when everything's finally peaceful. Victoria studied her for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. Fine, but don't linger too long. I'll be back at camp with the guards. If anything feels off, don't hesitate to come find us. Sabina gave a small smile, her gaze drifting to the quiet landscape beyond. I'll be fine. Go on. With a final glance back, Victoria turned and strode away, her boots crunching against the gravel path, leaving Sabina alone with the silence. Little Rose Duchessa. Paulina wandered through her villa, the fine stone floors beneath her feet, carrying the weight of her thoughts. The villa was adorned with roses, their fragrant petals a subtle reminder of the elegance she had cultivated in both her surroundings and her ambitions. As she passed through the archway into her private chamber, Duchessa Honora entered, her presence purposeful, but weighed down with a hint of concern. Paulina, Honora began, her voice low and measured. I have news. The rebellion. There are more involved than we anticipated. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the room as though expecting someone to overhear. Juliana is in on it, but what remains unclear is whose side she'll ultimately choose. Her army, her resources, they'll make a considerable impact on the war to come. Paulina nodded thoughtfully, turning to face Honora. That's the key, isn't it? The resources. Juliana's army will be a great asset to us if we can keep her on our side. But we can't risk losing her to those who seek to divide us. Honora's brow furrowed. But Shoma, he loves her. The bond they share will be a problem. especially if Juliana lets her heart rule her mind. She could strike a blow that would slow us down at the most crucial moment. Paulina's expression hardened. We can't let emotions dictate our path. Shomar's feelings are a complication, yes, but they're not an insurmountable obstacle. We'll find a way to manage that. With a measured calm, she added, Lord Alaric Draven and his wife, Lady Seraphina Valmain, will sail with us when the time is right. Their support will be pivotal when the war truly begins. Honora stood silently for a moment, her mind turning over the complications of their situation. She then muttered almost to herself, Rex Males. If only he had been patient. He could have been an ally, a powerful one. But now, he's lost. Paulina's lips curled into a faint, almost dismissive smile. Impatient, reckless, and now out of play. Your son or not, he was a fool. The only thing we need is Gaia to provoke the people. The unrest will be our ally. Once they rise up, we'll have our chance. Honora's eyes narrowed as she thought about the path that lay ahead. You think Gaia can truly provoke them? She softly whispers. They will provoke Gaia. Paulina met her gaze with unwavering certainty. Yes, and when she does, we'll strike. Patience, Honora. The right moment will come. What prisoners? Ducissa Honora paced the stone terrace of the villa in Paulton, the sun casting a warm glow over the vineyard below. Her expression was tight with frustration as she turned to face her husband, Dux Erdern, who leaned against a marble pillar, arms crossed. They were both 45, their faces showing the signs of age and the weight of responsibility. He may not be the brightest Erdern, she began, her voice carrying a sharp edge. But he's still our son. I won't let him rot in Gaia's dungeon like some common criminal. Dux Eden sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he watched the distant hills. You think I don't know that, Honora? But challenging Gaia's rule was reckless. And now Rex Mills sits chained alongside 14 others, all paying for their foolishness. Honora's gaze hardened as she looked out over the vineyard, her jaw set. Mills have led the revolt. Our son followed out of ambition. And Salonina, Gaia's own half-sister, is imprisoned too. She's not known for meekness. But this time, it was Mills who pushed too far. Eden pushed off the pillar, walking closer to his wife, his expression softening. And yet, Gaia won't show mercy just because we beg for it. You know her, Honora. She's as unyielding as stone. If we're to get our son out of there, we'll need more than appeals to family ties. Honora turned to him, her eyes burning with determination. Then what, Erdern? If words won't sway Gaia, do we resort to threats? Or do we find a way to convince her that keeping him alive is in her best interest? Erdern held her gaze, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. We'll find a way, Honora. But it has to be one that doesn't make enemies of those we can't afford to fight. Even Gaia knows that sometimes a kept promise is worth more than a conquered land. Erdern leaned forward, his face grim. 3 months, Honora. They've been rotting in those cells for 3 months, and Gaia hasn't even spared them a glance. Honora clasped her hands together tightly, her knuckles white. I know, she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper. It's not like her to ignore something so sensitive. Mills and the others were a threat. Yes, but to leave them there, festering without a word, it's not justice, it's torture. Eden nodded slowly, his gaze distant. I worry that this silence is a decision in itself. the longer they stay down there, the more likely it is that she's already made up her mind. What if she plans to make an example of them, to show that no one, even her own blood, is beyond punishment? Honora's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and fear. She wouldn't dare harm her own sister, would she? Salanina may be headstrong, but she's still family. And our son, he doesn't deserve to pay the price for following orders. She can't just leave them to die. Eden sighed, rubbing his temples. You underestimate Gaia's resolve, Honora. She's ruled with an iron hand for decades, and she's made her share of sacrifices along the way. If she thinks sparing them will weaken her hold, she might see this as a necessary cruelty. Honora shook her head, a tightness in her chest. We have to do something, Eden. We can't just sit here, waiting for her to decide their fate. If she's determined to let them waste away, we need to act before it's too late. We can't let our son become a pawn in her game. Eden looked at her, a hint of desperation in his eyes. And what would you have us do? A direct appeal? An offer of loyalty in exchange for mercy? Or something more drastic? Honora met his gaze, the weight of their situation settling heavily in her chest. Whatever it takes, Eden. If we must humble ourselves before Gaia, so be it. But if there's even a chance to bring our son home, we can't let pride stand in the way. The silence stretched between them, the breeze carrying the distant sound of birdsong, a sharp contrast to the turmoil in their hearts. They both knew that time was running out, and that every moment they hesitated brought their loved ones closer to an uncertain end. Gaia's council. In the council chamber, sunlight streamed through the grand side windows, illuminating the rich tapestries that adorned the stone walls. The air buzzed with tension as Fylkir Gaia sat at the head of the table, surrounded by her advisors. The atmosphere was thick with concern, each face reflecting the gravity of their discussions. Marshal Combs Karras, his brow furrowed, leaned forward. My lady, unrest brews in the West Navaria regions. We need to consider a religious conversion initiative to maintain control, he cautioned, his voice steady but edged with urgency. Gaia's frustration boiled beneath the surface, the weight of past failures pressing heavily on her. We've already faltered in the Aphrodinia campaign, she retorted, her tone sharp. If we lose access to those vital territories, our entire empire is at stake. She fixed her gaze on Karras, her eyes narrowing. And if my sons perish in battle, you will face the consequences as well. A heavy silence fell over the room, the gravity of her words sinking in. The council then turned to the northern conflict involving Yara Gudrun, a war that threatened the stability of their realm. Gaia's voice rang clear, cutting through the tension. Send a raven to address this war. We must put an end to it before it spirals further out of control. With authority resounding in the chamber, the council members nodded, their resolve strengthening as they prepared to act on Gaia's command. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable energy, igniting a fire within their chests. Each council member exchanged determined glances, their eyes reflecting a mix of excitement and trepidation as they contemplated the actions that lay ahead. The sun may shine brightly through these windows, Gaia said, her voice steady and commanding. But we cannot ignore the shadows of impending conflict that loom large over our empire. Regina Kalika, known for her fierce loyalty, leaned forward. We have the strength of 10,000 men ready to march. Our enemies won't know what hit them. Tester, ever the voice of caution, added, "But we must not be reckless. Every decision we make now will shape the future of our dynasty. Strategy is as crucial as our numbers." Dux Publius, with his shrewd intellect, chimed in, "Let's employ surprise tactics and outmaneuver them at every turn. Let them underestimate us. It will be to our advantage." Kumskaris nodded in agreement. "And we must also consider our alliances. They may prove pivotal in the battles ahead." Gaia looked at each of them, her gaze steady and resolute. The air buzzed with anticipation as the council members rallied behind her. They envisioned the strength of their forces, the strategies they would employ, and the glory that awaited them. The tension felt electric, as if the very walls of the chamber were alive with the weight of their ambitions. As Gaia laid out her plans, her words ignited a spark among her advisors, each one eager to contribute to the unfolding strategy. They knew that the fate of the empire rested on their shoulders, and the thrill of impending action coursed through their veins, driving them forward into the fray. Before the meeting concluded, a sudden commotion at the chamber door caught everyone's attention. Gaia turned, her expression curious. In rushed her lady-in-waiting, breathless and radiant with joy. "Your Grace!" she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "I bring you joyous news. Ulpia has given birth to a son." A wave of excitement swept over the council, breaking the tension that had settled in the room. Gaia's stern demeanor softened as a smile broke across her face. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice filled with warmth and pride. "My grandchild has arrived." The council members exchanged delighted glances, their previous discussions momentarily forgotten. Regina Kalika clapped her hands together, her excitement palpable. "This is wonderful news. Another child to add to our family." Dux Publius raised his goblet in celebration. "Let us drink to this new life." Gaia, filled with elation, stood and proclaimed, "This child represents a new beginning, a glimmer of joy amidst our challenges." Regina Testa smiled knowingly. "While he may not be the future of our dynasty, every addition to our family brings us closer together and strengthens our bonds." "Comes," Karis nodded. "And with a grandchild to care for, we must ensure the empire remains a place of safety and stability for him and all our kin." As laughter and cheers filled the chamber, Gaia felt a renewed sense of warmth in her heart. The weight of impending conflict still loomed, but in this moment, hope and joy filled the air. She would cherish this child, nurturing the connections that mattered most, even as the storms of war gathered on the horizon. She makes her way to Ulpia's chambers, eager to meet the newborn. As she enters, she finds Ulpia resting in bed, cradling the tiny infant against her chest. The glow of motherhood surrounds her, despite her weary appearance. "Welcome to the world, little one," Gaia murmurs, leaning closer to admire the child. The boy has light brown hair and bright eyes, an encouraging sign for the future of House Houghton. "What shall we name him?" Ulpia asks, her voice filled with hope. "Vale," Gaia replies confidently. "A strong name for a strong boy. He will grow to be a worthy fighter for our house." A smile breaking through her exhaustion as she looks at her son. In that moment, Gaia feels a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that this child represents the future of their lineage. The burdens of the council meeting momentarily fade away, replaced by the joy of new beginnings. As Gaia gazed at Vale, a chilling thought crossed her mind. The council's discussions of war were not merely whispers in the wind. They were the shadows of a storm looming on the horizon. She knew the peace of their house hung by a thread, and any misstep could unravel it all. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A breathless messenger burst in, eyes wide with urgency. "My lady, the scouts have returned with alarming news." Gaia's heart raced. She felt the weight of her responsibilities surge within her, mixing with an uneasy sense of dread. As the messenger continued, her mind raced, envisioning the battles and sacrifices that awaited them. This child, she thought, looking down at Vale, might inherit a kingdom on the brink of chaos, falling apart. The village was ablaze, a fiery inferno that devoured everything in its path. Screams and the clash of steel filled the air, and the scent of burning flesh made Victoria gag as she crouched behind a crumbling stone wall. Her hand gripped Sabina's tightly, the younger woman trembling so hard, Victoria thought she might collapse. "We're going to make it," Victoria whispered, though the words felt hollow, even to her. The path to the woods where her horse was tethered seemed impossibly far. Every step was a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. "They're everywhere," Sabina stammered, her voice cracking. I can't." "Yes, you can," Victoria cut her off sharply, her tone commanding. "You're staying with me. Stay quiet, stay close, and we'll get out." They moved together through the chaos, creeping past burning homes and the guttural laughter of Sidibe's soldiers. One of them dragged a screaming villager into the open, his blade raised high. Victoria forced herself to look away as the sword fell. She tightened her grip on Sabina, pulling her forward. "We're almost there," she murmured. But Sabina suddenly froze, her eyes wide with terror. Ahead of them, a soldier stood in their path, his back to them, torchlight dancing on his armor. Victoria's heart pounded. "Stay here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, don't leave me," Sabina hissed, clutching her arm like a lifeline. "Sabina, I'll be right back. Just stay quiet." Before Sabina could protest, Victoria slipped into the shadows. She crept behind the soldier, her dagger trembling in her hand. With a swift, silent strike, she drove it into the man's neck. He crumpled with a gurgle, the torch clattering to the ground. Victoria rushed back to Sabina, yanking her forward. "Come on!" But their escape hadn't gone unnoticed. Shouts erupted, and more soldiers appeared, their torches cutting through the smoke. "They see us!" Sabina screamed, panic overtaking her. "Run!" Victoria ordered, dragging her forward as arrows whistled past them. The heat of the flames was suffocating as they sprinted through the narrow alleyways. Sabina stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Victoria growled, hauling her upright. But the soldiers were closing in, their jeers growing louder. A burning beam collapsed in front of them, blocking their path. Victoria cursed, her eyes darting wildly for another way out. "We'll go around." "No time," Sabina cried, her voice frantic. She clung to Victoria, her nails digging into her arm. "Don't leave me, please, don't leave me." Victoria's heart twisted as she looked into Sabina's tear-streaked face. Behind them, the soldiers' footsteps thundered closer. There was no way out for both of them. "I won't leave you," Victoria swore, her voice breaking. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. Sabina's terror had rooted her to the ground. Victoria's choices were narrowing to nothing. "Go, Sabina!" Sabina shrieked, clutching her tighter. "Please, Victoria, don't let them take me. I'll fight. Just don't leave me." Tears streamed down Victoria's face as she shook her head. Sabina, I can't. A soldier rounded the corner. His blade raised, Victoria shoved Sabina back, throwing herself forward. The soldier lunged, and she met him with a savage strike of her dagger. Blood sprayed across her face as he fell. "Run!" Victoria screamed, yanking Sabina forward. But Sabina refused to move. "I can't do it without you." The soldiers were on them now, torches blazing. Victoria's mind raced. There was no way to fight them all, no way to save them both. Sabina's desperate grip on her loosened as realization dawned in her eyes. "Don't leave me," she whispered again, softer this time, as if she already knew. "I'm sorry," Victoria choked out, tears blurring her vision. She turned and ran. Sabina's screams echoing in her ears as the soldiers swarmed. She didn't look back. She couldn't. When she reached her horse at the edge of the woods, her chest heaved with sobs. The weight of Sabina's final cry, raw, broken and betrayed, pressed down on her like the flames consuming the village behind her. Victoria rode into the darkness, knowing she would carry that sound with her forever. Publius stepped onto the cool stone of the castle balcony, his boots echoing faintly behind him. The crisp night air greeted him as he unrolled the scroll, its edges fluttering in the soft breeze. His sharp eyes glanced over the inked words, but his gaze kept straying to the view below. The town of Paulton spread out like a sea of lanterns, flickering warmly against the shadowed hills. The distant hum of life, muffled laughter, the occasional bark of a dog, carried faintly to his ears. Above, the stars hung low, their brilliance mirrored in the streams threading through the city. Publius sighed, clutching the scroll tightly. "Paulton," he murmured, his voice lost in the wind. "The heart of this empire? But for how long?"